Coogs house. The Houston Cougars have not been able to get into the college football playoffs top 25 ranking since taking a second loss, but now the people on that committee are about to look a whole lot different after Mack Rhoades has been placed on personal leave.
You are Locked On Cougs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Cougars, daily podcast about your Houston Cougars. I'm your host, Houston-born teacher and coach Parker Ainsworth. Whether a Houston fan or just a hater who came to step by, thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first listen of the day and making the Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network in the world. I'm excited to talk to you some today about some kind of chaotic news, but if you want to join the conversation and you don't know what to say, in the comments down below, tell us, you ever had the big O Cup in Waco at that place called George's? It's a little overrated, but it's kind of the only thing to do. The Magnolia, I don't know. Today's show is brought to you by our boys over at DoorDash. We got more on that fun later. I do want to talk to you in this bonus episode. It's a little bit of a bonus morning on a Friday. We're going to preview Auburn and the basketball game this weekend a little bit later with Zach Black. We have Locked On Auburn. But right now, in the present tense, I want to talk about the Baylor athletic director, Mack Rhoades, being placed on personal leave, if you can get placed on personal leave, what that means for college football playoff, and what that college football playoff means for Houston as it stands. Spoiler, I'm not predicting Houston in the top 12, but I do have some thoughts on it. Now, yes, Mack Rhoades has been placed on personal leaves, and yes, this is the same Mack Rhoades that was at Houston from 2009 to 2015. Recently at Baylor, like in the last 10 days, he has berated star tight end Michael Trigg for wearing a yellow undershirt. I don't know. That was a problem. I thought that was one of their colors, but it's a problem. He also apparently put his hands on the shoulders or neck of an assistant coach or someone else on the sidelines. Was kind of losing his temper and cool, to say the least. However, reports indicate that that is not what any of this leave that he has been taking personally as of Thursday afternoon is about. Allegations that reports indicate, or reports say, I should say, this part reports do say, allegations do not involve Title IX, student welfare, NCAA rules, or the football program, which implies that it cannot be the Trigg incident. It cannot be the assistant coach interaction. It's something else. I should point out that Dinich on ESPN I think it was Pat McAfee's show, but don't quote me on that part. It was definitely on ESPN, commented that they did receive a report of allegations on Monday at Baylor, as vague as that is. And there will be lots of speculation, and has already been lots of speculation. There may be speculating in the comments right now, but what that might be, that's not really the interesting part to me. I will say that, Baylor is a Baptist university. While it's not strict and nearly as strict as like a BYU, who's also going through something right now, and went through something last summer and seems to be frequent. BYU and Baylor does have an honor code of sorts as a Baptist university. I don't know that that's what this is, but I point that out to say that it could be something school related that is not necessarily illegal, but it's not something that Baylor allows, right? So anyway, the big deal for Houston in the immediate future, and Big 12 for the rest of college football, frankly, in the immediate future, is that Mack Rhoades has been serving as the chairman of the College Football Playoff Committee. He's the voice we hear each week explaining the thought process of the committee, and he has, much like his personal leave, stepped down. Does not seem like a whole lot of his choice in that, but that's the case. I would also look at, at this Baylor AD spot as not, if he is to ultimately get the axe, a super desirable position. So he got put in charge in 2016, as facing this right now. This may be the end of things. We'll see. He replaced Ian McCaw, who was resigning in 2016 after having gotten there in 2003, resigning in 2016 during the Art Briles era sexual assault scandals. You'll notice Ian McCaw got there in 2003, replacing Tom Stanton, who was there from 96 to 03, and resigned in 2003. Amongst the discovery and subsequent legal things and everything surrounding the murder of Patrick Dennehy a basketball player who was killed by one of his teammates there at Baylor. You notice Tom Stanton got there in 1996, replacing Dick Ellis, who resigned as the AD in 1996 because several coaches on campus were being indicted for wire fraud. So Waco's a great place to work if you like to get fired in a ball of flames. And I think that probably won't weigh into everyone seems to think they can fix it. So I don't know if that'll necessarily weigh into who comes next for Baylor. I do think, though, that I'm not worried about people getting poached from Houston at this point with Baylor both being Big 12 programs. And again, the laundry list of things that could go on in Waco that you don't want to be, let's say, at least within an arm's reach of as it stands. As far as the committee itself, the College Football Playoff Committee directly, as in 1-to-1, replaced Big 12 AD with Big 12 AD by bringing in Mark Harlan. Mark Harlan spent a lot of time in Arizona, which is his alma mater. He's been at the University of Utah since 2018, and he is notable in this because he berated Big 12 officials just last season in his first season in the Big 12 2024. He went on the field, was berating them on the field after the game, went to the public in a press conference, and ADs do not typically go to those. And he commented that they were, quote, not excited about being in the Big 12 anymore as an athletic program, and called it, quote, not fair that they had the first edition of the Holy War, a Big 12 versus Big 12 kind of game stolen from them, in quotes. He's been banned from Big 12 sidelines across. I mean, like, this guy is not exactly a pro Big 12 AD. And as we look at Big 12 getting biases against it in the College Football Playoff Committee, he's not necessarily the strongest of voice and advocate for the conference. I think it begs the question of, can he really be a conscious, an unbiased observer of the Big 12, even as a Big 12 member, given the things he said? I think it's a very valid thing and moment for the conference, as Houston is trying to time up their own elevation of a program with the elevation of the Big 12, right? Look and see multiple teams in playoff this year for the Big 12 as Houston's having a strong season. Then with next season, the year after, and the strong recruiting class in 2026 that Houston's bringing in, you hope to develop that into a team that can compete to get into the college football playoff more seriously in the near future. You want to make sure the Big 12 has an established spot or an established residence, so to speak, in those 12 current college football playoff spots. And you wonder if, honestly, is Harlan the AD to kind of help carve out that niche? You're hoping Mack Rhoades is going to help open up some Big 12 doors there and kind of make things more even. I'm not so positive you can say that about Mark Harlan, at least not for what you will get out of him. You might hope for it, but I don't think you can say you're going to get that out of him. Now, Harlan will not be the chairman, which I think is interesting, because that means we will not be hearing from him very often. We won't have to hear him explain what happened in the room, so to speak. And that's almost more problematic, right? Because we've heard him publicly not be happy about the Big 12. And so if there is controversy in the Big 12 in these rankings, we're not going to hear from him about, well, what did you say on our behalf at any, we're not going to have to hear from him, I shouldn't say, about what he thought on the Big 12's behalf. Now, the chairman is going to be Hunter Yurachek. Also ironic because he did replace Mack Rhoades at Houston. So a second Houston former AD is in this, but he's been in Arkansas since 2017. He's already on the committee. There's more of an elevation of status for him. And with the current way the college football playoff rankings go, I would point out that Utah is sitting just outside at 13. BYU, who beat them, is sitting just inside at 12. But Utah's losses are to 12 and 6. And so do you see the Utah AD trying to say, like, well, Utah should really be a little bit higher because their only losses to Texas Tech and BYU, and BYU should be even higher than that because their only loss in the season is to Texas Tech. And do you see him try and squeeze those teams in, or do you see him try and say, like, look, yes, Utah lost a road rivalry game to BYU and a home game with an injured quarterback to Texas Tech, and so they should actually get to leapfrog the same way Texas is ahead of XYZ or whatever, or the same way that Oregon is ahead of, or that Notre Dame is ahead of Miami, even though Miami beat Notre Dame. It's not really about that as much as where they are right now. Do you see the Utah AD try and move that? It is interesting that you have an AD get thrown into this very suddenly who is the athletic director at a program currently at the edge of the college football playoff. I cannot tell. Again, that is a reason it could help the Big 12. I've mentioned reasons it could hurt Big 12. But one thing that I don't think is up for debate is the college football playoff has been hurting the Big 12 for a minute now. And Houston, ironically, is kind of at the center of that part of the story. I want to get to that in 1 second. But first, I mentioned today's show is brought to you by DoorDash. And look, DoorDash, each week we're looking at who delivered because DoorDash is delivering for you. As we look at who delivered for the Houston Cougars last week, I'm going to go to the hardwood for this one. I'm going to go to Kingston Fleming. We waxed poetically about him a little bit on Wednesday night in our live show. But as we're approaching the weekend, it's hard to not look back and look at the streak that he has started the season on. And just like Kingston Fleming's, you can win every Saturday with DoorDash. Streaks save more every time you order. These players deliver what matters most. And if we break down Kingston Fleming's, he is moving at an elite pace, growing at an elite. He is growing at an elite pace, moving at an elite speed. He is dominating both sides of the floor. He had 19 points. He gets a bunch of rebounds, gets a bunch of assists, plays tremendous defense. He is really doing everything on the floor already and has been working up to this. But if you've been following Locked on Cougs for a long time and following Kingston Fleming for a long time, you know that this has not been an accident. This has been building. It's not some fluke or anything. Kingston Fleming is beginning a hot streak to start his college career. And just like Kingston Fleming delivered for the Houston Cougars, DoorDash delivers for Saturdays. With DoorDash Streaks, you save every Saturday you order. Stack it up all season. You can save $250, including $10 or $100 in DoorDash credits. Order this Saturday. Keep the streak alive and fuel your $100. Man, that's $100. Order this Saturday. Keep streak alive. Fuel your game day only with DoorDash. Terms apply. Period goes through November 18th. Program to the Locked on Cougs, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, the number one sports podcast network in the world. They tell me that's good. Think that's good. Look, Houston is not in the college football playoff picture right now. And I don't mean this to say they should be in the top 10 or 12 at the moment as a 10-2 Houston Cougar team in the Big 12. I would point out there are teams with 2 losses in the top 12, but I'm not going to get into all that. What I think is interesting is actually the back half of the top 25 rating, where you have Cincinnati at 25 and are kind of missing Big 12 representation the rest of the way. Houston would be that Big 12 representation at 8-2, right? And Houston would be in there in that 19 to 24 range, right in front or around Cincinnati. And Houston's notably missing. Now, Parker, you're biased, Locked on Cougs host. Of course you win. Yes, I do want Houston in at a personal level. I'm not going to dodge that in this. But I don't think it's worth throwing a blind eye to what the ripple effect of not putting Houston rightfully in that is. Get to that in a second. First, I want to point out, though, as you look at these resumes, like USF, their big win on the season is beating Florida. Florida's horrible. Florida fired their coach. Florida's blowing everything up. The only other team worth mentioning in this is that South Florida lost to Miami, but Miami, while they're looking like the highest ranked team right now in the ACC, is not going to have a chance to play for the ACC title, right? So they're going to be troublesome if they can represent the conference. USF might get away with this with having no real big wins and a, quote, good loss. And they also lost to Memphis, who recently fell out of the top 25 after losing another game of their own, right? Cincinnati, who is a Big 12 representation, and so we should probably not throw them out of it, but they are number 25 after losing to Nebraska, which is a 3-loss team, and losing to Utah, who's in the top 12. Well, Houston lost to Texas Tech, which is number 6, and admittedly had a long, bad Saturday against West Virginia a couple weeks ago. But one of those 2 losses is to Texas Tech. And frankly, you lost your quarterback in the middle of the second quarter of that game. And I think that as I look at this, I go up and down the resumes, talk about Georgia Tech or Pittsburgh also lost to West Virginia, and they're sitting right there at 22, or any number of other teams in this, and be like, okay, Houston's resume stacks up fairly comparably, if not better than that team. Why is Houston not in this? It's because of the ripple, and that's where this bias thing plays in. Texas Tech had a big win at Houston. Both teams were undefeated at the time, and presently that win is as good as it's going to look for Texas Tech because Houston's 8-2, chance to go 10-2, And let's be honest, Tech had their way in the second half of that football game with Houston, right? If that win is against a top 25 team, Tech looks a lot better, right? And if BYU is playing in the conference championship of a conference that has that many top 25 teams, they look a lot better, right? And so suddenly you're looking at the impact here, right? So if Tech moves up in the world up to like number 3 or 4 because they beat Houston and Houston's number 22, well, then Tech becomes 3 or 4. Well, then suddenly BYU's one loss is not to number 6 Texas Tech, it's to number 3 Texas Tech. Well, if you look at who A&M's beaten, those schools aren't falling very far out of the top 5. And so suddenly BYU gets catapulted up a little bit. Utah, their losses are to Tech and BYU. If those schools were to become like, let's say, ranked 3 and 8, suddenly it's okay. Well, that's 2 top 10 teams, and Utah's blowing the doors off everyone else. They get to move up. That would all be rippling out of putting Houston or schools like it that are excelling in the Big 12 right now in that back part of the top 25. And again, I'm not just throwing in there because I want to. Houston's got as good or better resume as Pittsburgh, as Iowa, as South Florida. It just does. And I think that we're getting used to these brands. Like, well, South Florida beat Florida. Who cares? Florida's terrible, right? Like, look at, I mean, South Florida's taken some bad losses. Pitt has taken some bad losses. And it's not unlike, anyway, I could go down, I'm not going to rip a bunch of other programs, not going to rip a bunch of other programs, not going to rip a bunch of other programs. But I am going to say that Houston getting taken out of this has been interesting to watch because of what it allows people to say about Tech, or what it allows people to say about BYU, or what it allows people ultimately to say about the Big 12. But Houston has won 8 of their 10 games, has played an arduous schedule, has taken their own injuries. Like, it's not like Houston's like some team that's gotten lucky on the injury bug or anything like that, right? And instead, here we sit. And so it'll be interesting to see how the shakeup in the committee moves things around. Does Harlan help the Big 12 because it ultimately will help where Utah stands right now? Will he be indifferent to the Big 12 because he was pretty upset with them fairly publicly, fairly recently? We shall see. But we're going to break it all down whenever it happens. Obviously, rankings happen. Like I mentioned, we're going to have an episode out later today with Zach Blackerby of Locked On Auburn, talk all things previewing that basketball game. We have all kinds of fun stuff around that. It's a good show. It makes you want to tune into that as well. Hit subscribe, hit the bell so you know when that show is live. Locked On Coogs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. That means your team every day. Go Coogs.